think I'm on. I think I'm on. I think my voice is working. Hi, my name is Douglas Griffin. This is my Sunday school class. Today's date is May 5th, 2024. We are finishing the book of Leviticus. I did not think we would make it through. People never teach on that's not true. There are people who teach on it, but actually it's very interesting if you understand the context and all of that. But we're finally doing the final chapter of Leviticus. I want to explain the book of Leviticus and why this is the last chapter. Um, the, there's a type of structure in the classical world, in the old world, 2,000 years before Christ. It's called a chiastic structure where everything points toward the middle. I envision like a candelabra where the candles on the top and there are other candles ascending down, and the candles, like you got five going up and five going up, and then there's this in the center. Everything points toward the center. There's a structure where you say A, B, and then C, and then B, and then A. They kind of mirror each other. And Leviticus is written that way because we like to save the best for the end. That's how we write. We build a climax toward the end, but they want everything to point toward the middle, and that's how you know the most important thing is because you finally you make your A point, your B point, and you finally make your C point. Then you repeat B and then A, and then at the end you kind of sum it up again. But you've made your point. Everything points toward the middle, and that's how you know what the most important thing is. So the book of Leviticus is written to instruct the Levites, the priests, on how to minister. Uh, we want to take it. I'm not saying it's not for us, but it is specifically for the minister. If you read a book of instructions to the minister on how to perform a wedding is different than how to be married. But it involves the bride and groom. It's not like it doesn't involve them. But these are instructions on when you perform a wedding, make sure you wear a robe. And when you perform a wedding, make sure you have the couple stand in front of you. It involves the couple. It's not like they have nothing to do with it, but it's instructions to the minister on how to perform the wedding. It's not, here's how you to be married. Uh, when you're married, you must always wear a robe, and when you're married, you must always stand side by side. And when you're married, you must put a ring on her finger every 5 minutes. That's not instructions on how to be married. And we treat Leviticus that way. Like this is instructions on how to live a Christian life. It's instructions on the Levites, how to lead the congregation in worship, and how to teach them how to have a relationship with God. Um, so it's based off the two most important laws: love the Lord your God with all your heart, because for 200 years the children of Israel had been in Egypt, not worshiping God. They've been worshiping other Egyptian gods, which they never stopped ever for the next 1,000 years of history, Jewish history. Not all of them. There were some in the Jewish faith who continued to worship idols and get in trouble. And there were plenty who were trying their hardest to worship God. But there were strains of it throughout because they're human people, right? You can never get every single person to do everything right. Um, but he has to change their thinking and explain there's only one God. That's new thinking. For 200 years, they watched the Egyptians worship a bunch of gods. So, and it was difficult because he says, where I'm sending you, not I've taken you out of Egypt, where I'm sending you, they believe there's a pantheon of gods. You're going to see a bunch of temples and shrines and things built to all these gods. And you're going to want to believe that. But there's only one God who's in charge of everything. That's hard for us to believe today. Here's how you treat your neighbor, which no country was doing it the way God wanted them to do it. countries were making slaves of the people. They were killing and raping people they didn't get along with. It. So here's how you worship God. Here's how you treat your neighbor. Here's how you preserve your own life so that I can keep you as a people alive for the next 1,200 years until the Messiah comes to do the key, most important thing, which is bring atonement for your sins. And so he explains atonement. Everything in Leviticus points to, in the middle, the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement, where all our sins are forgiven. Leviticus does not list all of our sins. God would not have enough room in any book on earth to list all our sins, because sin is simply doing something God would not do. God sets the mark and we miss it. God knows that we're going to sin, because once we broke our relationship with him in the Garden of Eden, which is why he wrote the book of Genesis, here's what happened. We had a relationship and sin didn't even occur to us. Everything we did, we just moved and walked and talked with God. But once that relationship was broken, like taking the banana off the tree and now it's starting to rot, then constantly our thoughts, our desires, because they're no longer connected to God, are going to be carnal. And we're going to want to do things and think just naturally, because now that's our natural state. God's like, I can't write down every single stray thought and every single thing you're going to do. It's all sin. Know that it is covered by the Day of Atonement. On the Day of Atonement, which happens once a year, they go in and here's the ritual for shedding of blood that covers all of your sins. Now, each day, there are certain things I am going to point out, God says, about worshiping idols, about how to treat your neighbor, stealing from your neighbor, because I got to teach you how to live with one another. If you are so defiant in worshiping other gods in my face, then my wrath has to come down from you. So don't do that. If you destroy one another by stealing from one another, committing adultery with one another, and killing one another, you won't last as a people. If you eat certain things that are going to give you disease, if you touch dead bodies and stuff and you don't know why they're dead, then you won't last either. So I've got to give you these certain things I've got to point out. But God is no way pointing out all sin at all. No. These are just things that will prevent you from worshiping me correctly. So don't worship other gods the way they worship their gods. Don't worship me that way. Don't bring a temple prostitute and think that if you have sexual relationships with this man or woman in the temple, that that's a way of getting close to this male or female god. Don't do that. There's a whole list of things. Don't do this, don't do that, right? A whole list of things that he does include because they involve worship or they involve how you treat your neighbor or what you do to your own body. But that's like a 10% of sins. The other 90% of sins, God said, I can't cover every single thought. Now, when Jesus comes, he does start to say, when you think of committing adultery, that's a sin. And they're like, what? He said, yeah. Jesus is like, to be honest, there's 1,000 things that weren't covered that are sins. If you're going to, but the Day of Atonement covers them all. And that's the central Leviticus 16 scripture, starting with 14, 15, 16. Is it 15 or 16? I think it's 16. Anyway, those central scriptures cover cleansing, purification, and atonement and forgiveness. That's what Leviticus is all about. Let me teach the priest how to administer forgiveness. And I'm teaching you about blood and how important blood is, because blood will be shed for you. Blood is the life. The life of your flesh, of your body, is in the blood. And so I've given you that as a mean to get eternal life. I'm using that as a metaphor for life. So you understand that sin equals death, but so therefore the blood will bring life, because that's what it does for your physical body. It will bring life for your spiritual body. So the shedding of blood is what's going to bring life to you. So that's what the scriptures are. But the other 5,000 sins you might commit. I'm not listing them. Just know that on the Day of Atonement, they're all forgiven. So he's gone through these different ways of worshiping him, these different ways of treating your neighbor, uh, how the priest should dress, what they should wear, what they should say, and then he's repeated it on the way back, and now he's giving one last principle. Leviticus chapter 27 is on redemption, and he covers something interesting that's just kind of not really in our culture, but was in their culture. The breaking of vows and breaking the curse. Uh, but I can relate it to our culture. So, because it's my closing, it's his closing chapter, Leviticus 27, Leviticus 27, God saying, so just kind of summing up redemption for you, because that's what the whole book's been about. And before I send you off into the promised land, again, I've got to let you know how to worship me. Then I'm going to send you off in the book of Numbers into the promised land. And of course, as we know, they rejected the opportunity to go to the promised land. And so they walked around for 40 years. And that's what the book of Numbers is what happened right after the book of Leviticus. Because in the book of Exodus, he brings them out. The book of Leviticus takes place basically a year after they've been brought out. It's maybe it covers a 2 month period. Book of Genesis covers for like 4,000 years. Book of Exodus covers a few months where Moses is down there trying to bring them out. Same thing with Leviticus, just a few months, but it's a year later. Book of Numbers covers 40 years of history while they wandered around in this, where that generation that still just had too much Egyptian thinking had to die. A few of them were able to get rid of their Egyptian thinking, and Caleb and Joshua, they were able to go into the promised land, but that mostly that generation had to die out because they still had too much Egyptian thinking. But so it's a 40-year period, uh, and then the book of Deuteronomy sums up everything that happened. So we are finishing Leviticus chapter 27. We're finishing Leviticus, and we're in chapter 27. Verse 1 says, Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when a man consecrates a vow. Now, a vow is a promise made by anyone to dedicate and give either his own person or a portion of his property to the Lord in order to avert some danger or distress or to get some sort of blessing, to avert some sort of danger or to get some sort of blessing. You make a vow to Lord. Lord, if you will just bless my crops, I vow to give you my lamb, or I vow to give you this, or I vow to give this property to the church, to the temple, to use. If you'll just do this for me and bless me in this way. People pray that way today. We don't have to pray that way today. Um, because we don't have to bargain with God. Lord, if you'll just bless, because God's already said he would bless us. But people pray that way today. It's a mindset we have. They had that mindset then. Um, or if they were vowing, they saw some danger. Lord, if you'll just protect me from this thing that's coming, I will give you whatever, right? I'll give you my son. I'll give you my land, my house, my property, myself. I will dedicate myself to your service. It was a way of thinking that permeated the entire Middle Eastern world and beyond. Uh, and and so God didn't correct them. God always meets us where we are and say, if you're going to do this, then fulfill your vow. Because once I come through and bless the land, don't treat me with that sort of disrespect and go, oh, well, I was just kidding, God. Because he's teaching them how to respect God. I'm a real person. I'm real. I'm real. And if you say you're going to do this and I come through, then fulfill your vow. I'm teaching you how to fulfill the vow. Um, Now, in some cases, they would change their mind, of course, later. And so he was saying, know that land that you promised, that you gave, well, now you kind of want it back. So there's a way of redeeming it. There's a way of getting back what you vowed. And I'll teach you how to do that. And he's teaching them, he's using to teach the principle of redemption because things can be redeemed. Sons, daughters that have been given over to the devil can be redeemed. Things can be redeemed. And so he's teaching the principle of redemption and the principle of breaking curses. That's what chapter 27 is about. It's still about redemption. I'm teaching you about redemption. Okay, so, but here's what Jesus said about this vow thing. Now, again, um, I'm making a vow to God. I'm making a vow to the temple. I will give a portion of my life to God, or I give a portion of my land to the temple, or I give it to the, the community. Right? You're making this vow to God in order to force God to do something. Jesus wasn't a, God's not really, he just knows, okay, people are going to do that. You're going to do it. So if you do it in this way. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 33, it says, Jesus says, again, you've heard it said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely. Not that you should not swear, but don't swear falsely. If you swear you're going to do something, do it. Now, they would swear to each other. So it started out as a vow to God. And God says, okay, that's fine if you want to give something to the temple or dedicate yourself to me. If I go ahead and bless you in this way, I'm going to bless you in this way. Go ahead and dedicate yourself to me. But they began to vow to one another. Hey, man, if you just lend me this uh, $5,000, I swear I will pay you back. I swear by God. I swear by the temple. You know, may God strike me dead, or I swear by the temple. May the priest of the temple come out and da, 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 or I swear by my own head. You know, my hair will all turn white if I don't come through to you personally. So people starting to vow to one another. And Jesus says, you've heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but you should perform your oaths to the Lord. Because you're saying the vow in front of the Lord. Hey man, I'm going to pay you back. I swear to the Lord, strike me dead. I'm swearing in front of you, Lord. Uh, that's where the Lord watch between me and thee when we're absent. The Lord watch if I don't keep my vow to you. So when Jacob had run away from Laban, and Laban found him, and they were going to go to blows, but they made a vow to each other not to attack each other. They made it in front of the Lord. The Lord watched between me and thee when we were absent one from another, like to make sure I don't cross over the earth. They set up the rock and saying, "You stand your side, I'm gonna stand my side, and the Lord strike me down if I break this vow and come over and kill you." That's why we try not to say that in church. Lord watch between me and thee, because it was really made between two people who were trying not to kill each other. Um, but they're making it in front of the Lord. So he says, you should not, you should perform your oaths to the Lord, because you're making it from the Lord. But in verse 34 of Matthew 5, it says, but I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, neither by earth, for it's his footstool. He said, this stuff belongs to God. You can't obligate God to fulfill your vow. Don't swear by God. God will strike me down God will strike you down if you don't obligate God to do something on your behalf. Don't swear by heaven. It's God's throne, not yours. You can't obligate God to fulfill your vow that you made, nor by the earth, for it's his footstool. Don't, may the land swallow me up. That belongs to God. You don't control the earth. Uh, Nor by Jerusalem, for it's the city of the great king, of the Messiah who's to come. Don't swear by Jerusalem, nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. You can't control that. But let your yes be yes and your no be no. If you say you're going to do something, just do it. Don't obligate God to come through in your behalf to your neighbor. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. For whatever is more than these is from the devil. Just telling you. I swear I'm gonna. He says that's the devil. It's from the evil one. So don't do that. Um, but here in Leviticus 27, they were making a vow to God, not to their neighbors. They're making a vow to God. Lord, if you rescue me from the situation, I dedicate this to you. I dedicate that to you. Or Lord, if you bless me in this way, I dedicate. So he says, okay, if you're going to do that, there's a way that you need to do it. But you don't have to do it. In fact, in Deuteronomy 23, which sums up everything, the book of Deuteronomy sums up everything. It says, when you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay to pay it, for the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and it will be a sin to you. So if you promise God something and God comes through, don't go back in your word to God if you do that. But verse 22 says, but if you abstain from vowing, it shall not be a sin to you. If you abstain, if you never vow in the first place, that's not a sin. God's not making you vow, but he's just saying respect God. If you do say, Lord, if you come through and God comes through, don't act like you didn't say it. Pay your vow. But if you don't vow, that's not a sin. I'm not saying you should vow. Verse 23 of Deuteronomy 23, that which is gone from your lips, you shall keep and perform. For you voluntarily vowed to the Lord your God what you have promised with your mouth. God didn't make you do that. God's not requiring you to do that. But just know if that's how you prayed, and you're not really, and you don't need to pray that way. You don't need to pressure God into something. Lord, if you just help me in this situation, I promise I'll go to church every day. Okay, I'm going to help you with the situation. Now go to church every day. But you didn't have to pray that way. You voluntarily decided to do that. You could have just said, Lord, help me from the situation. We don't pressure God into anything. God's like, man, I wasn't going to do it, but okay, you insisted, so now I'm going to do it. We can't twist God's arm and make God do stuff. Even though I know there's crazy teaching out there, command you me the works of my hand. See, we're supposed to command God and tell him what to do. No, because then that makes us God. We don't tell God what to do. We don't pressure God into anything. We don't influence God. We don't. God is God. God is God. That's why he elected him God. No, I always joke like that. That's why he's God. He created the universe. That's what the whole book of Job is about. Where were you when I created the universe? You telling me what to do and telling me I'm wrong? Eh. So that whole command you me the works of my hand is actually God mocking people when he says, command you me the works of my hand? You telling me what to do? And people who haven't read the Bible, but have just read parts of it, unfortunately take things out of context. They do not do it on purpose. No one's doing that on purpose. I think I'll take the Bible out of context today. No one's doing that on purpose. But unfortunately, that's what happens. And it'd be like flipping through a 500-page novel and finding a paragraph and reading that one paragraph and saying, "Oh, I know what the whole thing says." It's like, how could you know what the? You would never do that. You would never just read one paragraph out of a book and think that you understood everything about it. But we do that with the Bible. So people who've never read fully all the way through the Bible and really taken time to break it down thinks when they see that verse, "Command you me the works of my hand," that they think they don't understand God was mad at them for doing that, trying to tell God what to do. The word says, "You shall decree a thing and it shall come to pass." He's questioning them. You shall decree a thing and it come to pass. If you read that whole context, he's mad at them for proclaiming peace and safety when God has already said, "No, I'm going to punish you for this." And the prophets would say, "No, God's not going to punish us. I declare peace. I decree that there shall be peace." And he's like, "You shall declare a good thing and it comes to pass." No, I I make things come to pass. If people just keep reading, they would see God's challenging that thought. So when we vow, we don't make God do anything. God, if you'll just do this, I swear I'll get it together. And God's like, okay, I wasn't going to do it, but you made me. Nah. But he is saying, so we just ask God to do something. If Jesus said, if it's your will, please do this. And he said, nevertheless, not my will, your will. I would love for this to happen, but I can't tell you what to do. And this was Jesus who gave up his authority to act as God and became a servant, the Bible says. So to demonstrate to us how to do it. So if God led him to pray for somebody, if God led him to do something, he would do it. If God wasn't behind it, he didn't do it. That's why he said, there are many things I could say to you, but I'm not going to say anything because God hasn't let me to say anything. There's many things I could do, but God's not moving on me to say or do, and so I'm not going to do it. That's our example. So we could just pray for God to move in a certain situation and believe that it's going to happen if we feel God's leading us in that situation. But we don't have to make a promise in order to get God to do it. But if you do make that promise, he says, keep it. If I come, because I know what you said, what you promised, keep it. Uh, Here's some example in Genesis chapter 28, verse 20. Then Jacob made a vow when he was running to Laban, when he was running from his brother Esau. In fact, Jacob did a lot of time, spent a lot of time running from people. That's why when he wrestled with the angel touched his side and gave him this limp so he would not be able to keep running, because that was how Jacob's way out of all situations, is to run away instead of recognizing that God was there protecting him. So he's running away from Esau because he thinks Esau's going to kill him, which he wasn't going to. God was going to protect him. He's running to Laban. He eventually runs from Laban, but on the way there, God gives him this dream and shows him that these angels are ascending and descending like this staircase. And he goes, "Oh, see, the angels are all around me." Now, he thought the angels only lived in that place. So he made a vow to God about that place where the angels lived. God was showing him a vision that the angels are always connecting us to God, that we're always have a connection to God. Wherever you go, Jacob, I will protect you. You have a connection to God. But he thought, oh, angels live here. So he made a vow in Genesis 28, verse 20. Then Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and keep me in this way that I am going, because I'm running away from Esau, I'll go to a place I've never been, and I don't know if I'm going to get jumped or mugged. I don't know. And he would give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I come back to my father's house in peace. Then the Lord shall be my God. I'll make you my God. And this stone, which I've set as a pillar, shall be God's house, because this is where I saw that God lives. And so if God will just help me make it back here to this, this stone shall be my pillar. It shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will surely give a tenth to you. So if you bless me, I will give you a tenth. So that's their idea. Lord, if you just, and I understand that thinking. I understand, Lord, if you just get me to a situation, I will never get in this situation again. Lord, if you just, we still say that. We still think that way. God's not mad about it. We don't have to do that. But God said, if you do that, keep your vow. Uh, Proverbs 20:25. It is a snare for a man to devote rashly something as holy and afterward to reconsider his vows. That's Proverbs 20:25. So that's not good. If you say, okay, I'm going to, Lord, I will give this to you, and then you don't. Ecclesiastes 5:4-6. When you make a vow to God, do not delay to pay it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you have vowed. Better not to vow than to vow and not pay. So God's not saying you have to vow. You don't have to make a vow to get something from God. But if that's your mindset, Lord, if you just get me out of this issue, I won't ever do that, then follow through on that. Don't say, oh, well, because that's how we are. Once everything is okay, we forget how we vowed and we promised to change our life. And, you know, Lord, this is my third drunk driving ticket. If you just make it so this person doesn't send me off to jail, I will never drink and drive again. So God delivers you from a situation, and then a month later, there you are drinking and driving. Well, just a little bit of it. God says, no, follow through on that thing that you vowed. You vowed that you would spend that time in the Bible instead of drinking or whatever. Follow through on that. But we don't. We forget. Oh, now that we're safe, we forget our vow. He says, God has no pleasure in fools, Ecclesiastes 5:4-6. Pay what you have vowed. Better not to vow than to vow and not pay. Do not let your mouth cause your flesh to sin, nor say before the messenger of God that it was an error. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Why should God be angry at your excuse and destroy the work of your hands? I was like, okay. Because God's saying, I keep my word to you, you keep your word to me. If you decide to do that. Uh, Book of Judges, chapter 11. Here's someone making a foolish vow. Judges, chapter 11. This is when they didn't have kings. They weren't prophets. They were just judges who were ruling different regions. And so it constantly in the book of Judges, when we get there in 3 years, It says people did what's right in their own eyes. And so, Judges chapter 11, verse 30. So we don't look at things they did in the book of Judges and go, oh, do exactly what they did. No. No. So it says Jephthah, verse 30. Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will indeed deliver the people of Ammon into my hands, then it will be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the people of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's. I will offer it up as a burnt offering. So whatever pig comes out, or well, not a pig, a cow, sheep, goat, whatever comes out toward me, I will offer that up as a burnt sacrifice. Verse 34, when Jephthah came to his house at Mizpah, there was his daughter coming out to meet him with timbrels and dancing, and she was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. This is his only child. That's who first came out the door. And it came to pass, verse 35, when he saw her, that he tore his clothes and said, alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. You are among those who trouble me, for I've given my word to the Lord, and I cannot go back on it. Now, that's not true. And so this whole book of Leviticus, chapter 27, says if you make a vow and then later decide to redeem the vow, there's a way of redeeming it. Like, I know I promised you my land, but I want to redeem that. I want to buy that back. You can, there's a price you can pay to buy it back. I don't want to give my land. I don't want to give my house. I don't want to give my son to you or my daughter to you. It says that's fine. You can redeem that because you've said you're going to give that. You can redeem it, and he's giving them the principle of redemption. So he says, if so, Leviticus chapter 27, verse 2. If you vow certain persons to the Lord, like in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 2, Elkanah, yeah, it was Elkanah. He had two wives, verse 2. He had two wives. The name of one was Hannah. The name of the other was Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Verse 6 of Samuel 1. And her rival also provoked her severely to make her miserable because the Lord had closed her womb. So it was year by year she went up to the house of the Lord that she provoked her. Therefore she wept and did not eat. Hannah's like, oh, my Peninnah is making fun of me all the time because I don't have kids and she does. Verse 11, and she made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head. So I'm giving this person to the Lord, not as a sacrifice, not like Jephthah, who said, oh, whatever comes out of my house, I'm a sacrificer. Him, whatever it is, and it turned out to be his daughter. He still didn't have to do that. He could have redeemed her. But he's stupid. Okay, so, but I can give my child to the service of the Lord, right? Not to death, to the Lord. Uh, uh, so God came through. She gets pregnant, she has a child. Verse 25 of 1 Samuel 1. Then they slaughtered a bull and brought the child to Eli. So they slaughtered the bull as Thanksgiving. They brought the child to Eli, and Eli's the priest, and she said, "Oh my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I am the woman who stood by you here praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition, which I asked of him. Therefore I have also lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he shall be lent to the Lord." So they worship the Lord there. I gave my child Samuel to you, and so I vowed. So Samuel went and lived in the temple from the time he was a child. Lived in the temple, raised by Eli, grew up in the presence of the Lord, and he wrote the book of 1st and 2nd Samuel. Okay, he anointed David king, etc., etc. So that's when you can redeem, if you can vow someone to the Lord, right, in that way, if you choose to. But what if you want to redeem them? So there's a valuation that you can put on the person. If you change your mind? There's a valuation that God says, well, here's how much you have to pay for this and pay for that in order to redeem that property back if you want to redeem it back. Uh, so uh, if your valuation is of a male, because if you decide, I changed my mind, you still have to, there's an exchange that can be made. Um, so verse 3. Now, The value, how valuable somebody was during this time was totally based on how much they can work, because that's all they did is work in the field. Agrarian society, that's all they did. So if you were crippled and could not work in the field, your value was less, not as your eternal soul, but the value of your work. If you were a male between a certain age of 20 to 60, those are the prime working years. Once you were 60, you weren't going to work as much. You were valued, your value as far as your work was concerned. Men at that time were stronger, bigger, had bigger muscles, so they were worth, and women were given different type of work to do. And so the men at this age were more valuable than the women as far as their work in that type of society. Today, that's not how you value anything. If there were computers around, or if there was accounting, but if it wasn't just based on pure physical strength like today, then if a man's teaching and a woman's teaching, that's not based on physical strength. So you pay them the same. They're valued the same. If a man's in charge of a company and a woman's in charge of a company, that's not physical strength. They're not literally beating people up every day when they walk into work. You pay them the same. They're worth the same. If a man is a doctor, a woman's a doctor, and they're cutting into your doing a tracheotomy, that doesn't require physical strength. So you pay that, they're worth the same. During this time period, you were literally pulling oxen and da, 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 and the men's muscles were just more developed than the women. So he's saying in this situation, the men, they're worth this much, the women are worth that much, because that's how you value somebody's, like, how much work did they do for you. So if your valuation of as a male from 20 years old up to 60 years old, then your valuation shall be 50 shekels of silver, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. Verse 4. If it's female, then your valuation shall be 30 shekels. 50, 30. It's not that much. It's not like it's that much at that time. $50, $30. Okay, it's not that big of a difference. Um, in Exodus chapter 21, verse 32. So it says, if it's a female, then your valuation will be 30 shekels. Right? And I'm just going to focus on the 30 shekels right now, 30 pieces of silver. Um, in Exodus chapter 21, verse 32, there's another valuation they gave to the servants. If an ox gores a male or a female servant, then he shall give their master 30 shekels of silver. Right? My female or male slave can no longer work, and so you owe me 30 shekels. We kind of do that today, right? Somebody gets in an accident, you ram into somebody's car, and we're going to have a settlement. I need a structured settlement. So you have a settlement, and you kind of have to evaluate how much earning power that person would have had. A friend of mine many years ago was parked at the bottom of a hill, and a cement truck, an actual cement truck, came loose and rolled down the hill and smashed into him, and he's now a paraplegic. He got a settlement. They had to estimate how much work would he do for the rest of his life that he's no longer prevented from doing, and you had to prove that somehow, and then that's how much the insurance company has to pay, because he's now crippled. He was an aspiring actor, and so they value how much work you're going to get done. That's what's happening here. My slave can no longer work. That's 30 shekels of silver, 30 pieces of silver. So if you were a slave, if you were a woman, if you were 30 pieces of silver, that's how much we give you. We know that from Matthew, well, from the New Testament, Matthew 26, chapter 14. Then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priest and said, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him to you?" And they counted out to him 30 pieces of silver. So from that time, he sought the opportunity to betray him. He's only worth 30 pieces of silver. So that was not an arbitrary number. That was the number you gave for a slave. Uh, you know, uh, 50 pieces of silver. He's incredibly the most valuable person in society. But if you're not the most valuable, then the next level down was 30 pieces of silver. So that's why they gave Jesus 30 pieces of silver. Okay. By the way, in Matthew chapter 27, verse 3, it says, "Then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that he had been condemned, was remorseful and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests. Why is he bringing it back? I want to redeem him. I gave him to you. I'm bringing this money back. I'm trying to pay back. And they wouldn't receive it. I'm remorseful. I paid 30, you paid me 30 pieces of silver. I'm now giving you 30 pieces of silver back to redeem him, let him go, basically. So he brought the 30 pieces back to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. And they said, was that to us? You see this, that's on you. And they threw down the pieces of silver in the temple and depart. No, he threw down the pieces of temple and departed. Like, no, you're taking this money. And he went and he hanged himself because they said, no, we won't receive it. And so he had bought in his mind Jesus' life and sent him to his death. So he hung himself thinking, oh no, uh, I did a horrible thing. I, condemned Jesus to death, not understanding that part of the plan. Judas never understood that part of the plan. He wanted Jesus to overthrow the Romans, and he thought he could force Jesus' hand by having the Romans come and threaten him. Because I've seen Jesus do incredible miracles. When the Romans show up, Jesus will finally, but Jesus let himself be captured and go to the cross. And Judas, this is blowing Judas' mind, and he just didn't understand that was part of the plan. No matter how much Jesus explained to Judas and the rest of them, this is the part of the plan. I got to go to the cross. He didn't get it. So it says in Acts chapter 1, let's go to Matthew chapter 27, verse 6. The chief priest took the silver pieces, that redemption money, and said, it's not lawful to put them into the treasury because they're the price of blood. And I'll explain that later. So they went out and they used the money for community. We have to do something for the community with this money. This condemned man, we can't take money for somebody who's been cursed and condemned. We can't take, that person cannot be redeemed. And so we got to use that money for the community. So they went out and bought a field. Now, why did they think we can't use money that's been given to redeem somebody? Because you can't. Again, you can redeem someone. You can, once you've said, I give my son to the Lord. Once you change your mind, you can buy them back. But they must be bought back with a price. And God is teaching us the law of redemption. We were bought with a price, right? So he says, yes, if you vowed someone or a piece of land or property or a person, you can buy them back. So that's what Judas tried to do. And they said, no, we can't because he's been cursed. This man's been cursed. Let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 17. It says, there shall be, well, it starts with, there shall be no ritual harlot. There shall be no Kadesha. They translated ritual harlot, but we know this is holy prostitute. And so thinking that no one would understand what that meant, they used the word ritual harlot. Because what's a holy prostitute? Someone who is in the temple, who you have sexual relationships with them in order to get close to some god. It's just nope, that's not a thing. There shall be no ritual harlot of the daughters of Israel. And it's the same word, Kadesh. There's Kadesh and Kadesha. But they didn't translate it ritual harlot of the sons of Israel. They translated it perverted of the sons of Israel, but it doesn't mean perverted at all. It means holy prostitute. So there would be no holy prostitute of the sons of Israel. That's just purely the translators saying, that's not, there's to be no holy prostitute of the daughter of Israel. There should be no holy prostitute of the sons of Israel. That's not a thing. And then the next verse says, and you shall not bring the wages of a harlot or the price of a dog to the house of the Lord your God. So the money that person makes, that woman or man makes, because you had to go in and pay them in order to have sex with them, in order to communicate with the God that they represented. And literally, we talked about this before, the name of the God that they represented would be above their heads. They had like a little booth, like a kissing booth at a fair, like that. And so the name of the God that you represented would be there. You would pay the money, like you would pay $2 at the kissing booth at a fair, which I've never seen, but we've seen them in movies, right? And so they would say, you cannot take that money. You harlot, who you're not supposed to be doing that in the first place, whether a man or a woman, you cannot bring that money into the house of God as an offering because it's sin money. So you shall not bring the wages of a harlot or the price of a dog to the house of the Lord your God for any foul offering. For both of these are an abomination towards your God. Someone who's sinning like that, you're doing something sinful that I told you don't do that. You cannot. Here, I'm offering this to the Lord. Okay, so under Jewish law, such money must be restored to the donor. Here, give that money back to the person, right? We can't take that money as priests, and that's why we're saying to Judas. They were saying to Judas, we can't take this money. He's a condemned man. He's a sinner. Jesus is a sinner in their minds, so we can't take this money. So if you had to give it back to the donor, so we're going to give it back to Judas, but Judas says no and refused to take it, right? And he threw it in the temple, and then he went and hung himself. So we can't give it back to Judas. You're supposed to give the money back to the donor. If circumstances rendered this impossible, or the offerer insisted in giving, like, no, I'm giving this money, like Judas, he throws the money in. No, I'm not taking this money back. Then it was to be expended for some public project. You did something for the community. That's why they went and bought land, bought the potter's field with the money that Judas gave them. Now, when he hung himself, the branch snapped and he fell into that potter's field that they had bought. Interesting that the very land that they had bought in Judas's name, that's where he fell and died when he hung himself. And so Matthew chapter 27, verse 7 says, they consulted together and bought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in. So we need to buy it when people come and we don't know who they are and they die and we can't find their family. We need a place to bury them. So that's what we'll bury strangers in the potter's field, to bury strangers in. Therefore, verse 8 says, therefore that field has been called the field of blood to this day, because that's where Judas died. So that's what you can still redeem somebody even though you've given them over, unless they've been cursed. And we're going to talk about that. Wow. And if from 5 years old up to 20 years old, okay, so this gives the price of all these different people. Leviticus chapter 27, verse 8. If he is too poor to pay the valuation, if somebody's too poor to pay to redeem that person back or that land back, then he shall present himself before the priest, and the priest shall set a value for him according to the ability of him who vowed, and the priest shall value him. Then you can work in order to get that property back and that person back once you change your mind. Leviticus chapter 27, verses 9, it talks about if an animal that men may bring as an offering to the Lord, that anyone gives to the Lord shall be holy. You can't substitute or exchange it, good or bad. If it all exchanges animal for animal, then both of it and the one exchanged for it shall be holy. So the one thing that you cannot take back if you are giving an offering to the Lord as part of your honest offering, not as a part of a vow, not as part of a vow, but as your regular offering, you can't exchange that. That belongs to the Lord. Those things that you have vowed, that God did not ask you to vow, that you just vowed voluntarily, you can get those things back because God's not requiring that of you. But the offerings that you are supposed to give, you can't give those back. Okay, so those offerings, the end of verse 11 says, which they do not offer as a sacrifice to the Lord, then you can present that to the priest. If you didn't offer it as a sacrifice to the Lord, then yeah, you can present that to the priest, and the priest shall set a value for it, verse 12, whether it's good or bad, as you the priest value it, so it shall be. Being clean or unclean, you can offer any, as a vow, as part of your vow, you can offer a clean animal and unclean. It can have a blemish, because that's part of something that God's not requiring. But if God's requiring a sacrifice as part of your regular atonement for sin kind of offering, that's got to be without blemish, because he's teaching them. Jesus was the lamb without blemish. He was sin free. So any of those offerings that are atoning for your sin, they have to be without blemish. But the vows that you've made, I'm going to give this to God, that can have a blemish on it, because that's not part of your offering, and that's different. In Leviticus 27, verses 14 and 15, it talks about a house that you might have given to the Lord and how you can get it back. When a man dedicates his house to be holy to the Lord, then the priest shall set a value for it, whether it's good or bad, as the priest values it, so it shall stand. So they set a value for it as soon as you give it, in case you want to get it back. Verse 15, if he who dedicates it wants to redeem his house, then you must add 1/5 of the money of your valuation to it, and it shall be his. Why do you have to? Same thing with lands. And it talks about 16 through 21 that if you give a land to the Lord, then you have to add 15 1/5 of its price. Why? Interesting enough, once you've given, because you think, well, didn't the Bible say you can't charge interest and blah blah blah? No, yes, you can't charge interest one to another, but anything you've given to the Lord, it's now worth more because God has received it. So they want to know that that unclean thing is now clean. That thing that you value that you get to the Lord, it's now worth more because God has taken it in, and now it's more valuable. So you have to add 1/5 to your to the price in order to redeem it. But you don't have to redeem it. But if you decide to redeem it, just know once you give it to God, He's made it beautiful. He's blessed it, so it's worth more. Leviticus chapter 27, verse 16 to 21 simply talks about, and I'm rushing because I didn't mean to spend so much time earlier, how to redeem land. And it talks about in the year of Jubilee, it's going to go back to the original owner anyway. So uh, if you value something, if you give it away, don't worry. It's going to go back to you in your Jubilee. Everything goes back to its original owner. If you bought something from somebody and you give it as a vow, it's going to go back to the original owner of the land in the year of Jubilee. Everything goes back to your Jubilee. Um, Verse 21 says, but the field, when it is released in the Jubilee, shall be holy to the Lord as a devoted field. It shall be the possession of the priest. So in that case, it goes back, it goes to the priests. And it depends on, I'm just rushing. It depends on if he really wants to give it to this is not, he wants the Lord to have it. He's not trying to. I should have started with verse 20. But if he does not want to redeem the field, if you don't want it back, then the priest can keep it. In the year of Jubilee, it belongs to the priest because you're not trying to give it back. Verse 20. But if he does not want to redeem the field, or if he sold the field to another man, it shall not be redeemed anymore. But the field, when it's released in the Jubilee, because everything's released in Jubilee, it's holy to the Lord as a devoted field. It should be possession of the priest. So if you don't want it, the priest keeps it. But just knowing that in the year of Jubilee, it's free. It no longer belongs to the man who gave it. I bought it from this person. I gave it to the priest. Well, in the year of Jubilee, you don't get it back. You who bought it from the man. The man doesn't want it back, so it belongs to the priest. But you don't get it just because you bought that person's debt. You know how people will buy your debt and make money off of you. You don't get to hold on to that. Either the man gets it back in the year of Jubilee, but if he doesn't want it back, it belongs to the priest. And it talks about the firstborn of animals, Leviticus 27, verse 26 to 27, and what their price is. It's the same thing. You gave an animal, you want to redeem it back, you have to add 1/5 price to it, but you can redeem it back. And that is what, but unless the animal is part of your sacrifice, again, if it's an offering to the Lord, you don't get to give that back. That's an offering to the Lord. But if it's something that you vowed, okay, and you want to get that back, you can get that back, but you have to add 1/5 of a price because God has made it special. God has made it better. Now, nevertheless, no devoted offering, verse 28, that a man may devote to the Lord of all that he has, both man and beast, or the field of his possession shall be sold or redeemed. Every devoted offering is most holy to the Lord. So again, if this is something that's been devoted to God as part of what he's asked for as a sacrifice, that belongs to the Lord. You don't get to get that back. Things you have vowed, which God did not ask you to vow, you just voluntarily said, I'll give you my car if you'll just get me out of this, help me pass my exam. Well, now you pass your exam, like, uh-oh, I have to give up my car. It's like, no, you can redeem it. You can get it back. But if it's your offering that God has already asked of you, that God asked of you, you don't get to get that back. Now, verse 29, no person under the ban who may become doomed to destruction among men shall be redeemed, but shall surely be put to death. So if God has cursed someone, they've done some horrible thing, and God has cursed them and said, no, that person must die, they cannot be redeemed. In 1 Samuel 15, um, here now again, God said, destroy everything, destroy the Amalekites, destroy everything they've got. In 1 Samuel 15, verse 20, it says, Saul said to Samuel, but I have obeyed the voice of the Lord. I've gone on the mission which the Lord sent me. I brought back Agag, king of Amalek. I've utterly destroyed the Amalekites, which he hadn't. He's lying. He didn't destroy them all. Verse 21, but the people took of the plunder, sheep and oxen, and the best things which should have been utterly destroyed, and to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal. Well, there's already law says if God has said destroy that, you can't then offer it as a sacrifice to him. It must be destroyed. There's a curse on it. And that's why Samuel says, verse 22, so Samuel said, has the Lord his great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Like, I don't want your sacrifices. I want you to obey me. If I've told you don't sacrifice that, don't sacrifice it. I want you to, that's why he says to obey is better than sacrifice. I don't want your sacrifices. If I told you don't sacrifice that, you don't please me when you sacrifice that. You're disobeying me. Um, so I'm skipping because I had all these verses. Now, here's what's interesting. If God has set something for destruction, um, it can't be redeemed. It has to be a life for a life. Someone still must die. So you can't redeem something. There must be a death. If God says there must be a death, then there must be a death. So in Galatians chapter 3, verse 13, it says, Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law. We've been cursed. We're supposed to die. There has to be a life for a life. And God is setting down this principle. If I've said that must die, there must be death. So we've been cursed because we can't fulfill the law. So Jesus had to die. There still had to be a death. There was no redemption where there wasn't a monetary price that could be paid. There must be a death. That's why Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us. For it is written, curses everyone who hangs on a tree. So if you hang on a tree, there's a curse on you. If you've been sentenced to die in that way, in order, verse 14, that the blessings of Abraham might come upon the Gentiles in Christ Jesus, that we might receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. So we've been redeemed. But Jesus had to die. That's why he says, if there's a ban on it, you cannot redeem it. There still must be a death. Because I've cursed it and said it's done. If you just voluntarily vowed, here, I'm going to give you my auntie, you can get your auntie back. But, and if there's some offering God is required of you, you can't get that back. But if God has cursed someone, there is no redemption in that case. There must be a death. So that's why we're so grateful that Jesus died for us. But he still had to die. He couldn't say, well, I've got $1.6 million. That should pay for all these people. Like, nope, there must be a death. That's why he had to die. Now, the last part of Leviticus concerns the tithe. Verse 31, if a man wants to redeem any of his tithes. Now, you cannot vow your tithes, but if you want, you can redeem them. You have to add 1/5 to it. So if you were tithing your grain, let's say, look, I grew all this corn in the field. I'm going to give 1/10 to the Lord. You can get that back, that corn back, but you have to pay its value plus 1/5. Because I'm going to have a party and I need all this corn, so I'm going to pay. So you can get your tithes back, but you have to put something in its place. They don't ever just hand them back. So you put something in. So at verse 32, concerning a tithe of the herd of the flock, 1/10 is holy to the Lord, so you have to give to the Lord. Verse 33 says, he shall not inquire whether it's good or bad, nor shall he exchange it. If he exchange it, it is all, then both it and the one exchanged for it shall be holy. It shall not be redeemed. Something that you have that God has required of you, you cannot redeem it. Something that you've voluntarily done, you can redeem it. But something that has been banned and cursed, you cannot redeem. There must be a life for a life. So he's explaining all of uh, this principles of redemption in the very last part of Leviticus, because he's explained atonement. The most important thing about the book of Leviticus is God is atoning for your sins. That's why the law of atonement is at the very center of Leviticus. And now he's explaining redemption. I don't want you to vow, but if you vow, you can redeem it. If I required something of you, like an offering or something that cannot be redeemed, um, and if something has been banned, you cannot redeem it. If something's been cursed, there must be a life for a life. And he's just kind of giving these principles to them because no other culture thought this way. And God is the biggest lesson he's trying to give as we end is that no other culture thinks this way because their gods are not real. That's why everybody can just make up laws. Well, the God of rain, if you dance around in a skirt for 4 days, then the rain will stop. Okay, you made that up. But there was no God of rain to come down and correct you. So people were constantly making up laws of how to reach their God and how to, if you want to reach that God, have sex with that woman and that'll reach their God. Making stuff up. And God saying, I'm a real God. I'm the only real God. These are my laws. They're different from every culture on earth. But I'm trying to get certain concepts down for you. And you're going to be the only people on earth that think this way. So you got to write all this down because everywhere else you go on earth, they're going to have whole totally different ways of living, different ways of worshiping. But I'm trying to train you that there is such a thing as sin. I'm trying to train you that there is redemption for sin, that there's atonement for sin, but that it does exist and it's not arbitrary. But if you love me, then you can avoid most sins. If you love your neighbor with all your heart, and if you take care of yourself, you can be blessed on this earth. I will bless you. If you slip up, there's atonement for you slipping up. But I'm going to reward you as a people and make you a shining example, which the Jews were and still are, of, of a people. And then once we were grafted in as Christians, I'll make an example of you as long as you're following my law of a people who are blessed, not who will never go through disaster, never go through tragedy, but that are constantly being delivered out of it, that are being blessed as they follow me, so that other people will go, what is it that you have that's so different? You act differently. When that person cursed at you, you didn't curse back at them. When that thing happened to you, all you did was pray and smile. You didn't go crazy. There's something different about you. You are avoiding doing certain things because what is it about? And God's blessing, I can see the blessing in your life. He says, I'm going to create a people that's going to make other people jealous. But that's when we're acting and doing what he wants us to do, then those blessings are on us and people want what we have. So he's saying, here's how you redeem something if you decide to redeem it. But there is something called redemption. There is something called atonement. These are all real principles that I'm going to teach you if you could just do them. Well, right in the next chapter, which is Numbers chapter 1, we'll see that the people tried and failed, but God still blessed them. God still, because we try and fail every day, God still moves them forward. But that's what the book of Numbers is. We're about to enter in. So thank you so much for listening to the book of Leviticus. I was rushing through because I didn't realize I just talked too much. But I will recap what we went through as we start Numbers next week. And on Wednesdays, I'm in the book of Luke. So I invite some of you to listen into that. Okay, thank you so much. And I'll see you next week as we start the book of Numbers. All right, bye bye.